Get how much? 7% to get into the European Parliament. They have 2 members in the European Parliament, so it is not impossible. But I agree with it's very strange that when the established politicians, the established parties, if they see that they need more money, they can together take a decision to raise how much money they get from the state. It's a very strange system, especially since many others doesn't get anything. There is no way to do it without having some rich mecenates putting in the money for you. So it is definitely a problem, but it's not impossible. I think it's getting more and more possible with the way how people use social media today, both the contributors and those who consume social media. So you can reach people in a much deeper way than just campaigns and affiches and TV commercials.
Thank you. I'm just going to bring in the and then you can come back. I'm going to take a few comments and then you can come back on whatever you like to respond to.
Promoting cynicism by the way you say that voting is not worthwhile, which surely would be the response of Alton Perry in terms of how do you engage people in politics. And the one thing about an election is at least people talk about politics. So how would you counter that challenge? But then on the other side of it, surely the point about parliamentary democracy as we have it now, or you have it in Sweden, is that it's not the realm in which politics takes place for ordinary people. It takes place in other realms. You've already mentioned the internet, etc. So why do we obsess about voting in parliamentary democracy? Maybe we should just forget it.
Is there anyone else with a question?
I guess one of the big problems with voting or limitations of voting is shown up by the European Union, in particular the referendums around the latest tweets now, until they get the correct answer.
I'm going to bring the speakers in and then I'll go out for another round of questions. You can also ask questions in Swedish and we can translate for Brendon.
I'd like to comment on our Irish friend over here. It's probably no help, but we've had exactly the same problem in Sweden. We voted for if we should belong to the European community or not. The people didn't want to do that, so and we have to vote for it again. Many years ago, we voted for or against nuclear power, and then people said we don't want nuclear power. They said that until in 30 years, nuclear power should be taken away. It didn't happen, and then the government said, "Oh, you mean the voting?" Where we actually didn't see it as a decision, we saw it more as a suggestion. And that would happen again and again, and as you say, it's a big problem all over Europe that, more as Brendon said before, you lazy idiots, we don't give a shit what you think, but we want to vote separately. It's very sad.
And of course that creates cynicism, not only among political analyzers and stuff like that, people like us. It creates cynicism among the citizens. Why care when my vote still, it doesn't count, no one listens to me anyway. So I believe real strong that those, I wouldn't call it politicians, because politicians become a little of a dirty word in this area, but those citizens that gather other citizens and say, we together must make our voices heard and we have to create our own future and do this together. That can create a very strong force, because people are tired of empty words, overruled decisions. Let's see what happens in this election, for example. We have 3 parties, at least 2 that have a chance to, new parties that have a chance to get into the parliament. What happens if that goes? And maybe 1 or 2 of the smaller other parties goes out. What happens with the established parties nowadays? Well, it will change the whole map of politics. And the worst case scenario in that case would be, for example, that the 2 biggest parties says, yeah, we can rule together. Social Democratic and Moderaterna say we can rule together because they're quite similar in many ways. They're state strong state, fundamental parties that can take the responsibility and carry the nation. What would happen with the people when they say that it really didn't matter? The two biggest parties, they wanted to keep the power and just wipe the other out. That can be a disaster for democracy and for the interest of people in politics. Because the politicians love to tell us people don't care about politics. And I haven't heard so much BS, actually, because people are so interested in politics. They talk politics all the time, and every time you sit down and have a discussion, you end up in political discussions. And people are aware, they are interested, and they are really wanting to see some development and some changing, but they don't trust politicians.
Well, I didn't say that voting is not worthwhile. I said that it's understandable why people don't vote. And it's not because they're stupid or idle or lazy. It's because there's little choice on offer and they make a rational or sometimes not so rational decision not to engage with that process. I think that's fine. There is a lot of anti-political cynicism today, which is a genuine problem. And I don't think it's something that we should celebrate. Oh, isn't it wonderful? No one votes, they're all so cynical. But I think the key point is that often that cynicism comes from top down. It's not a bottom-up phenomenon amongst the public. It comes from the elite itself and from various political events that have happened over the past 10 or 20 years, where politics has been emptied of meaning, where politicians themselves have spread distrust and suspicion about politics. All those things, I think, have contributed to a general feeling of cynicism. So I think even tackling that requires having a serious debate rather than blaming ordinary people for being cynical and lazy, which is what the government does, which of course makes the whole thing even worse. And I think there's nothing more cynical than voting just because you think you should vote. That's a pretty cynical thing to do. It's pretty meaningless, it's pretty empty. And often the person who stays at home because he really genuinely, passionately feels that no one is worth his vote is a more decent political citizen than this person who goes to vote out of habit or duty or because they think they have a responsibility to do so. But we shouldn't give in to all this process. I think there is definitely space to challenge it through developing new ideas, developing new political parties, however hard it might be, and voting if you want to vote. So I'm not suggesting we give in to the system.
Great, thank you. Are there any more questions or comments? Swedish or anything? Questions from the floor? Okay. If I could, you'd like to respond to any of that, but there was also another point that came out earlier which I thought was interesting on perhaps politics is happening elsewhere, outside the voting booth. Politicians and other individuals are kind of celebrating the fact that whilst we might have low voter turnout in the UK or Sweden or wherever, people are actually more engaged in charity, volunteering, supporting NGOs, and going on to different countries like solidarity projects. So, is politics happening elsewhere, and is that a good thing? You can have that question answered, but
Yeah, well, on that issue, I think that's one of the things I find most depressing. When you talk about the state of parliamentary democracy, and everyone says, don't worry, because there's all these NGOs and charities doing loads of great work on the environment and everything else. I'm never really convinced by that, because I think lots of those kind of extra parliamentary movements are based on the end of democracy itself, and the emptying out of politics, and they gain their power precisely from the fact that ordinary people have less clout than they did in the past, and therefore these small interest groups can make a bigger impact than they would have done previously. So there's something quite elitist about that process, I think. The death of democracy on one side and then the rise of these fairly elite groups on the other. So I think challenging the current state of affairs will mean challenging the corrosion of parliamentary democracy and the emptying out of mainstream politics, but also challenging some of those new movements that are rising up to take the place of that process, and challenging both sides of that coin.